Ngobo is out in the Western Cape. The Democratic Alliance says it's headed to court today to challenge the 2025 fiscal framework. The party says the process that led to that adoption of the report was flawed. Newzroom Afrika's Zianda Ngobo is tracking developments on that story and joins us now live. Zianda, very good afternoon to you. I believe you are with the DA's Helen Zille.
Absolutely. Helen Zille leading that press briefing. Of course, she still has the court papers in her hands, an urgent interdict being filed. Two parts to that court action. The first part is twofold. So there's part A, which is going to declare what happened on the 1st of April when that standing committee on finance adopted the fiscal framework, declared unlawful. And in that first part, they also want to interdict the VAT increase. Part B is looking at the VAT Act, and they're basically saying that the Finance Minister has fleeting powers, that he's allowed to declare VAT increase and it doesn't even have to pass through Parliament. So they want that aspect of the VAT Act, in particular Section 7.4, to be declared unconstitutional. Helen Zille, let's talk about this. Earlier on I asked you about, well, you're taking a parliamentary process and now you're inviting another arm of state to deal with what is by and large a political process, and you've said, well, Parliament didn't follow the rules. Which part of that joint standing committee was not followed? I mean, it was an 8-hour meeting. I was sitting there. The exact and specific aspects that you are taking aim at.
Well, it gets a little bit technical, but let me get to the general point that you're making. And the general point is this: there is no such thing as the right of one arm of state to do its business while violating the law. If it violates the Constitution and the law, the remedy is to go to court. And if the court says you violated the Constitution or the law or even your own rules, then it becomes unprocedural and it is null and void. So we're saying that the Portfolio Committee did not follow its own rules. Firstly, the chairperson tried to turn amendments into motions that could be voted down before they were included in the report, which is wrong. And finally, there were a whole number of other things that get very technical, but finally, they did not have a full and final report for the committee to vote on, and without that report having been voted on by the committee, it was taken to the plenary session of Parliament on the 2nd of April, and that procedure was entirely wrong. That is the procedural point. There's the constitutional point of the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana, having the right to simply announce a VAT increase without the approval of Parliament, and that gives the ministers legislative power, which we can't accept and which is unconstitutional. So that is what we're taking. We would have loved to have worked this out properly through the political process, but if the ANC negotiates in bad faith, then we are going to go into the legal lane, and we are going to make sure that the ANC sticks by the Constitution and the law and its own regulations.
Let's talk a bit about the political process, because some would say, well, you're acting like sore losers, that you can't accept that the ANC went and negotiated with people outside the GNU because you made ridiculous demands in relation to this budget, and you are even asking for things that have got absolutely nothing to do with the budget, and you're going back to your default position of acting like an oppositionist, but you're actually governing. So govern and use what your 20% to work for you.
Let me tell you what's ridiculous. Ridiculous is when you're in a government of national unity, being the biggest party in that, negotiating with the second biggest party, but going behind their back to negotiate with parties that aren't even in the GNU. That is the worst possible faith that you can demonstrate in political negotiations. And no coalition anywhere in the world would tolerate or accept that. So that's where the bad faith starts from. The DA is not making any ridiculous requests at all. Just go and take a look at them. Every one of those positions that the DA took is essential for getting South Africa's economy growing again, so that people invest, so we increase jobs, so we reduce the highest unemployment rate in the world, and so that people have a hope of getting themselves out of poverty. That is not an excessive or extreme demand. It is a totally logical and, in fact, existential demand for South Africa.
It's very clear that things are tense between you and the ANC. You've got this court process going on. Let's talk about what the federal executive is likely to discuss when you meet at 1 p.m. today, because at the end of the day, you did not adopt this budget. Your ministers, however, sit in the cabinet. A lot of questions around what you're going to do. Let's say the DA decides to stay in the GNU. Or what would that mean in essence? How do you go on after this?
Look, I can't speculate. Obviously, the FedEx is going to consider the whole swath of events, past, present and future. We're going to look at different scenarios, as we always do. We're going to look at the pros and the cons of those different scenarios. We're going to try and look at the consequences, obviously the intended consequences, but also, as far as we can see them, the unintended consequence. And we have rational, in-depth debates in the DA, which are necessary, and that conclusion is then what we follow. So I can't, as its chairperson, sit here and say what it will decide. I'm not going to preempt that discussion.
On a little bit of a personal note, Helen, you can appreciate that politics is about optics, and there's a lot of perceptions, real or imagined, that, you know, you always trump John Steenhuisen, and he wasn't even leading, this press briefing. Where is John? And Helen, are you the person who is standing in between good relations between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance?
Absolutely not. I was not in any way involved in negotiations with the ANC over this issue. John obviously led that with the president on the other side. In my job, in the DA's constitution, I'm responsible for litigation. My job is the litigation lane, and that is what I work in. So John instructed me to move into the litigation lane, to take this lane, and that's my job description.
Unity in the DA, you're all moving from the same hymn sheet?
Yes, we are. Certainly on VAT and certainly on economic policy, 100%.
All right, Helen Zille is the DA's Federal Council chairperson, sitting in her litigation lane, filing that urgent court interdict. Two parts to it: the Finance Minister's powers insofar as being able to announce a VAT hike and it being immediately operationalized, but of course taking aim at that Joint Standing Committee on Finance's adoption of that report, which was ultimately presented in the House yesterday and voted on by a 12 votes difference in Parliament yesterday.
All right, Ziyanda Ngobo, thank you for that update.